simply did not exist in the country. It was a structural problem.
How long is
And not
this? About 7 minutes.
It actually describes the kinds of in 1976, a group of poor women villagers in Bangladesh. And by the time of writing in 1998, he had left 2.3 billion US dollars to 2.3 million families across the world. Microfinance has played a huge role in enabling more finance to get to people. Now, this video is not about loans, but it is about an excuse by borrowing his money and applying it not to villagers to countries instead. Because what Lewis identified that the villagers were locked out of the existing financial system in the country applies at a global level. Right now, 24 African countries cannot issue international credit loans. No one will buy them. And what is really true? Before some countries can get emergency loans from the world's biggest lender of first met was seen by banks to be junk and fundamentally have too much debt because they could not pay back their debt. They could not service their debt. And indeed, often they would take out new debt to pay back old debt. However, when we really looked at the villagers, they realized that they did not have too much debt at all. What they had was too little cheap debt. That's what we have to get at global level. The world is not in a situation of too much debt, but in a situation of too little cheap debt, specifically for the poorest, the low, and the middle-income countries. Okay, and how do we enable this problem? Again, let's go back to what Yunus did. The innovation that Yunus brought was to bring the villages together. Use the trust between them as collateral rather than things like their land or their homes as collateral, which is what traditional banks do, and gave them a joint loan. That's exactly what can be done to global level. African countries and others will take out loans together jointly and use each other's economic growth prospects as collateral. Borrowers would meet regularly to determine the priority projects based on eligibility criteria read amongst themselves. Borrowers would each make equal but small, low-interest regular payments into a central pot, managed by an independent trustee who will then pay back the interest. The repayments would be small to create feasible space, but also sufficient to build in cushion for temporary collateral if needed. Borrowers would deliver the projects independently, monitor and evaluate results, all while meeting regularly, keep each other accountable for progress, and agree on the group plan. And of course, borrowers would appoint representatives to interact with the creditors, who may or may not be interested in the impact of the loans. The key thing would be getting the money, just like Ramin's app did for the women villagers, and making them to escape the debt cycle and actually create new businesses. This borrowers fund, applied at a global level, will help countries escape perceived debt crisis and instead provide cheaper, more easy to pay loans to the countries to ensure important growth projects go ahead. Where hasn't this been done? Yunus wondered this himself. In his book, he reflects that it's really down to how certain economists, not from poor countries, have framed their challenge as finding solutions to extreme environments, rather than finding solutions to overcome limitations, while also not explicitly acknowledging that credit or loans can shift power and equality. That's what's happened at a country level. Others have not thought of creating a borrowers club for the poorest countries because often we are not from our countries. and they think that their task is to distribute limited amounts of aid or loans to the best projects, rather than find ways to empower borrowers to reach their potential. For example, reach the SDGs. Through the Grameen Bank, Yunus reimagined how to help people get more loans they have ever been able to get. He reimagined their financial system to put the borrower at the center. That's what we want to do. At this time, for countries, the international financial system has been dominated and determined by creditors for far too long, and it has not delivered. There is enough finance in the world to fight poverty everywhere. We just need to find ways to manage it better to deliver for the poorest countries. That's what a borrowers club can and will do. To paraphrase Yunus, low and middle income countries, African countries, are not poor because they have run wild and populated by stupid or easy people. Low and middle income and African countries are poor because the financial structures which could help them widen the economic base simply do not exist in our world. It is a structural problem and not a country problem. Let's fix the problem. Let's see and imagine the world through the borrower's eyes. Let's innovate.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking time to listen to that video. And of course, it will have some impact on what we're here to discuss today. Let me again, on behalf of Development Reimagined and the Centre for Global Development, welcome you all once again. Here at the annual meeting, much is being said about the critical juncture that our world is in. We have the COVID-19 pandemic, Black Lives Matter, vaccine hoarding, supply chain disruption, Russia-Ukraine war, financial mismanagement in some economies, and the inability of the largest dependent economies to shift to low-carbon societies. Many of these crises are cutting off trade and tourism, driving up inflation globally, creating floods and droughts that would otherwise not exist, diverting aid and other financial resources towards short-term humanitarian and military projects rather than development. These are important immediate problems. But just like the video expressed, the financial structures we're working with try to respond to these challenges while also getting onto a development pathway that cuts poverty and creates prosperity. The entire world population are also broken. The financial system has serious structural deficits. I'll give you just one example. Here at the annual meeting, you'll hear many people talking about percentages of countries that are debt discussed and how this is rising, evidence surely of too much debt. But this classification is highly problematic. In 2019, 64 countries around the world had debt to GDP ratios over 60%. Third of those 64, 21 countries were African. However, all 12 of those in that group, diverse of 64 countries that were classified as debt were in the right. This classification issue has worsened post-COVID-19. Now we have 79 countries that have debt to GDP ratios of over 26 countries are African. However, there are now 23 and 79 that are classified as high risk of debt stress. And again, all 23 are African in that diversity. No wonder the 2015 study found evidence of an African risk premium. That African countries pay 2.9% higher on bonds than the rest of the world, those that can get those deals in any case. There is serious bias in this classification system. Indeed, many high and middle income countries have developed borrowing sheets while sustaining high ratios over under 100%. Yet we have countries like Zambia who are going through processes to restructure their debts, despite the fact that 60% of the country still need access to electricity, or over 45% need access to the internet, and roads must improve by over 200% just to reach the Chinese level. Where will the finance for the future, these future needs, come from if the country has too much debt? My hope is that today, this conversation that we will have in this room and online will take these longer-term, fundamental and structural challenges of the international financial system that was shaped and managed here in DC in many cases as a process. My hope is that we can make this event special and unique by taking these structural problems as the starting point for the problem identification for our conversation, rather than the immediate crises that others are discussing and seeking to use the existing problematic structures to tackle. The fact is, despite the pledges of small and scaled up finance, despite the creditor coordination, these challenges have not yet been addressed. Could borrower coordination, full spectrum, from simple sharing of data amongst borrowers, sharing of experience, negotiating strategies, best practice contract clauses between borrowers, to actually creating new banks and funds, pool country liability funds, could these help address these challenges? This is our task today, and I look forward from our panelists and from yourselves, the audience here in this room and also online, to hearing very practical proposals, very practical from all of you here. With that, yes, with that, our friends, let me hand over to our brilliant moderator for the discussion. Honourable Jude Moore, Senior Policy Fellow at Creditors Global Development and Liberia's former Minister of Public Works. And welcome our panelists to the stage. Jude, presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss this. All of this week here is not global development. We've had discussions about strains of the financial systems. First, Treasury is now. So obviously, a wide range of experiences to this question. And so I will start off with a general question and hope I try not to do that. So they would, I would ask a general question, and then in responding to that question, they can incorporate their opening statements. And so I think first, each of the panelists, from your perspective, what are, I mean, it's from the IMF, from an African, from a Latin American government, from the African Development Bank, the ALSF, from government of Botswana, and Paulo will join us later. What are the benefits of coordination among borrowers? What are the benefits that accrue to the borrowers, but the international system as a whole, if borrowers are coordinating their action in engaging the system, but also engaging creditors? So we'll go in this way. We'll go with Dauda, Maya, and then we'll go with Boholo and Olivier. Dauda.
Thank you very much, Judy, and thank you very much to Hannah and Lokman Reimarchin for inviting us to this very important discussion. I think actually Hannah made it clearly during her opening remarks. This is an important issue about how important borrowers coordination is, finding actually innovative solution to the challenges Africa that we are facing, the limited fiscal space. All of that I think requires innovative approaches. And I believe the idea of exploring to what extent borrowers coordination can help address those question is certainly very timely. I certainly will have time to get back to the detail, but my main point is I believe that both creditor coordination and debtor coordination, borrowers coordination is extremely critical to debt management in Africa. I think you asked the question about how borrowers coordination can be helpful. I believe in many ways, certainly it can be helpful in ensuring that debtor countries do have more bargaining power when they discuss with their creditors. It's very helpful also in terms of actually allowing good sharing of data and practices, as Hannah was saying, among debtors. I believe all debtors do face, some of them actually, the same issues in terms of how to manage debt in a way that is actually most effective. Some have successfully done that, others have done, unfortunately, less so. So I think it's also an opportunity to actually learn from success story about how best to do it. Another issue also is, I guess, and I think many African countries are facing that, is when actually you are facing a risk of debt distress, high risk of debt distress, or when you're in debt distress. It is important to have effective mechanism, effective debt restructuring mechanism. And I believe actually to the same way it is important in those circumstances to have creditors coordination, the same way it is also important to have actually effective borrowers coordination to ensure that, debt restructuring negotiation are successful. And I believe this is also another way having effective borrowers coordination can be helpful.
Thank you. Maya?
Well, thank you very much. Also, let me thank the organizer for the invitation and CGD for organizing this great event. And this is a very timely question as well. The global economy has been undergoing pressing times. This is not undeniable. Several shocks have affected the economy, and emerging economies, developing economies are the most vulnerable to these shocks. I believe, these times present an opportunity for the international community to step up. We've been discussing this before the meeting started. Where is the international community? What's the response to the international community to these events, to COVID, to the war? Where is the international community now to respond to the debt crisis that is coming, right? There is an urgent need to reform the international financial architecture. So I think, as to your question on what is helpful about having a borrowers club. I think also it's a broader, my answer will be broader. It's not only about debt restructuring and getting together to renegotiate debt. It's also about pushing for international financial architecture reform. The asymmetries of power that currently exist in the international financial architecture are undeniable. We need to fight those. We need to get together actually to reduce the power asymmetries. That also will help the negotiations, but will bring borrower countries more leverage in different aspects of the debt cycle as well. For instance, there are several initiatives that a club like this could push forward. Actually, creditors have their own clubs, and that is helpful for them when in the negotiation to push for better terms from themselves. And borrowers, the lack of club for borrowers actually is something that it need to change. But I think the scope that we should give to this should be broader. We should think about all the debt cycle to push for transparency, for debt transparency, but not only for debtor countries. In the Argentine experience, for instance, Argentina had to hire information agents to find out where all the position of the creditors are. So this is also well, something that we went through, that the borrower always presents their positions, and the debt of the borrower is always more transparent. And credit, we don't know what's the incentive or the what's behind creditors' incentive in the negotiation, in the sense that we don't know if they are holding CDS, for instance, or if they want a fair deal or what's the deal, because we actually don't have enough transparency for the creditor side. So we need to have more, we can get together to discuss debt management, debt transparency, and of course increase also capacity building. That is also important for our countries, I think. Well, this is my beginning. I have a lot of things to say. I think This is a very interesting and enriching conversation, and hopefully it's the kickstart of something that we can create together as well.
Absolutely. Minister, I'll turn to you. You know, once a minister, always a minister. Eh? No, Minister Boholo, yes.
There are many ministers today.
But we would like your comments on this question of borrower coordination and the benefits of borrower coordination. So please, over to you, Boholo.
Thank you so much, Jude, and a very good afternoon, good evening for me over here. Very pleased to be joining you. Sadly, I can't be there, but I wish I was in DC. I think, you know, I feel like this question has already been adequately addressed by the first two panelists, and I just want to add a little bit more with reference to when we thought we needed to trade more and better within the continent. We thought about coordination. That's what the AFCFTA is. It's coordination and it's aggregation. And we know the benefit of coordination and aggregation, and we know where that level of ambition stands to put the continent in terms of being a viable trade partner and having a much stronger voice, because the AFCFTA automatically makes Africa the largest trading bloc. And it would be the same kind of thinking rationale, or at least that I hope to bring to this discussion, that if we've thought about it around trade, we certainly must think about it around finance. More so because we know that well over 58% of African countries are expected to have some sort of a debt crisis or fiscal challenge, and already about 17% of them are already within a debt crisis. So just based on that, and that over 8% of Africa's GDP, some African countries' GDP goes towards paying interest rates, towards loans. while in developing countries it's around 1%. That disparity in itself calls for us to work towards coordination. And I really like what was mentioned earlier about dealing and tackling the asymmetry that currently exists in the global financial system. And in order for us to tackle it, it's for us to have a better understanding of what goes on in our deals. And it brings me to that point of data, needing data in order for us to really understand what the negotiations look like. I mean, this issue was called for when the West in particular was concerned that Africa was piling itself and drowning under Chinese-led debt. And so I don't see why it should be any different when we're thinking about the global, the much broader global financial system, including the MDBs themselves. So we need to have a lot more visibility on what goes into the loans, especially when we start really talking about issues around climate adaptation, resilience, climate action, and this very new green development pathway. Data is very crucial for converting whatever climate finance strategies we might be putting in place, but over and above even climate finance, but more developmental finance strategies. I particularly liked, Jude, as I wrap up, what Professor Sachs mentioned a few weeks ago during the New York Climate Week. He challenged that very few times do MDBs and other lending institutions actually take into consideration the biggest pillars of development and the goals of development. So very little of them do they look at when we provide this loan, we're actually targeting poverty reduction, we're targeting employment creation here. And so they reduce or target the interest rates in relation to what the purpose and the goal of the loan is. And I think that conversation would be more emboldened as we work towards coordination and aggregation in the continent and beyond. Thanks. Back to you, Jude.
Olivier, we'll go to Olivier and then I'll repeat the question for Paulo. Olivier, your institution actually provides the technical legal support to countries that are looking to negotiate, whether it's with the private sector or with other. Could you talk to us a little bit about, first, again, the benefits you see of borrower coordination, but also just from your perspective in providing technical and transaction support to governments looking to whether coordinate among themselves or negotiate with other actors and partners?
Thank you, Jude, and good afternoon, everyone, and good evening from Abidjan. My apologies, I missed the opening remarks and part of your opening of the panel as well, Jude. But I got the question, so I think most of the colleagues on the panel have addressed the question in terms of the merits of bringing borrowers together. Obviously, lending and sovereign lending, at least traditionally, is an exercise that is done under duress, under tough circumstances, at least traditionally. Now, what that comes with is that your negotiating power or your ability to negotiating terms as the sovereign, the ability to negotiate terms in your favor is reduced, right? I mean, that's just the dynamic of those particular circumstances. But bringing lenders together is actually a way of sharing best practices. There's, there are the innovative mechanisms which we may discuss in this part as part of this conversation. Promote those innovative mechanisms from one country to the other. Learn from each other, talk to each other the way the borrowers talk to each other and coordinate. So I mean the merits of consultation between lenders are obvious to me. Now, in terms of the feasibility of clubbing borrowers and lending as one, that to me is still very much a question mark. But I'm hoping that this discussion will shed light on the feasibility, on the mechanisms behind that, and of course the LSF in its traditional role stands by African governments in particular to help them embrace whatever convenient solutions exist to depart from what we've seen in the past, that even currently debt piling up and opening the way to litigation or to drastic measures.
Thank you, Olivier. We're joined now by Paulo Gomez. Paulo is Chairman of Orango Investment Corporation, former Executive Director at the World Bank, former presidential candidate in Guinea-Bissau. I need to add that. Paulo, before you came in, the question was, panelists were giving opening remarks, but also talking about the merits of having borrowers coordinate. So any opening remarks and response you want to have to that?
Well, is the mic okay? So I apologize for being late. I thought I was somewhere trying to negotiate that for nature. And to be more precise, it was Conservation International. It has good experience of best practice about it. It's certainly something that I think we should encourage to look at it. I think, as Olivier said, I think it's not easy to club the borrowers together. And it's not just on debt. When I look at my own experience at the World Bank, it wasn't easy to have countries to just strategize together, even during the time of the HIPIC initiative. I think we tend to forget that at some point it was completely taboo. We couldn't discuss about multilateral debt or multilateral negotiation. There was, in fact, the need for pressure coming from several corners during the Jubilees and leadership like Wolfenson to start having really a discussion about it. But I think it's possible. I think now with the current global state of affairs, we see clearly that with the dollar strengthening, that I have serious problem for countries that have their debt in dollars. And we're seeing really accident waiting to happen. But I think for that to happen, to club countries together, I think we need to help countries to organize themselves in terms of debt management and debt strategy. Many of our countries, despite many efforts, and I don't know if that would, in the case of Senegal, who had a very strong experience of debt management, and you had a group of people in the department, ring fence, of all political intervention in terms of nominations and appointment. Those people were very bright people in the administration dealing with debt. In many of our countries, that has disappeared. So you need to go back to the basic and to see how those debt management units or departments to be strengthened. Secondly, you need also to, I would say, to be a little bit more thematic of the issue of debt. It would be difficult to address in a cross-cutting way, the issue of debt for what. And I think I will just prioritize essentially debt around infrastructure and energy, and try to build that coordination, focusing on this sector. I'm not saying that finance other type of sector is not crucial, but this one is so important, and it's linked with what we have discussed on several occasions with Judd about the Chinese debts. Basically, I don't know if you mentioned it, but the money for infrastructure with the current situation of China, I think will dry up. And there will be a huge gap. Many mistakes have been made in terms of financing and getting money from China. But I think some countries were quite serious about using the money from China. I think I will refrain to blame the Chinese. It was our fault. I've seen some countries that have engaged very strategically, ring-fencing themselves from corruption practice with China, and they've used the money properly. So just to kind of point the finger to one side, I think something that I think we are missing the point. And finally, apart from strengthening the capacity of the debt management, the epicenter of that coordination will happen around the World Bank and IMF. Let's be frank. This place, Washington, the Bretton Woods institution will continue to be the epicenter of everything around the issue of debt, the issue of financing. And African countries will need to organize better to strengthen their voice into the Bretton Woods ecosystem, and refrain from focusing on geographical, I would say, alliances, the Francophone, the Anglophone here, and try to get together to have a common position. And I think it's possible. So to summarize, I would say capacity building at the country level and ring fence those units or departments from the political interference. Secondly, to be a little bit more thematic in terms of coordination, not to try to grab everything. Thirdly, to use the platform of the Bretton Woods ecosystem and use the Sherpas for them to be together. This notion of Sherpas was more common, again, even if you look at countries like Senegal. I'll give you an example of Senegal coming from a small country. You had in the ministries a group of people who were basically the Sherpas and moving from a minister to others. And they were talking to each other, even at the regional level. And that had good impact in terms of having some common position and try to see if it maximizes the interests of the country. So I will stop here. I missed most of the things at the beginning, so I missed probably.
Oh, it's actually everything's on point. You're good. Yeah. I think it's clear, just looking at it from even a very general point of view, that coordination is useful. There's merit to it. It's advantageous. So the question then has to be, why haven't we seen it? When we faced COVID, most African countries independently, the big manufacturing pharmaceutical companies, they couldn't make the kinds of requests they wanted, both in volume, in the volume they wanted and the ability to pay. So the way Africa went about this was to create AVAT, well, the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Tax Team, to pool the continent's purchasing together, and it worked in that. So pooling resources to address an issue like debt and creating a borrower's club, there's obvious benefits to that. So I would like to hear from the panelists, why doesn't it happen? Why do we not see it? And in responding to that, but why, is what do you think the response will be from creditors? Is this something that creditors will welcome? Or is this something that the creditors will push back against? And I would like to start with the people on the screen. So let's go with Olivier, Boholo, and then we come the other way. Why? And Olivier, you provide technical and advisory services to sovereigns. Why haven't we seen this kind of coordination among borrowers, especially when we're seeing it among creditors?
Well, as I was saying earlier, borrowing often happens under duress, under tough circumstances, and maybe, but that's just my assumption. Under those circumstances, countries are keen to reach a solution as quickly as possible, and hence don't see the merit or the benefit of sharing solutions or options with others. The other thing is and Paulo was talking about capacity building as one of the priorities. I think there's been a difficulty in overcoming capacity issues. We're talking about very complex documents, agreements, very technical concepts, the kind of 100 pages main document and then 600 pages annexes. That can really be intimidating. And issues such as what is the right cost of borrowing? Am I going to be able to restructure my loan easily? Do I put myself in danger if my loan is backed by sovereign assets? Those kind of issues are not issues you want to necessarily share with others, right? So I think there's been that there's been that hindrance preventing countries from clubbing. And I mean, and maybe simply because there wasn't any initiative in that sense, and no particular country pushing for, or no particular group of country pushing for such kind of solution. Yet there are as I was saying, innovative solution, contingent debt instruments, and lessons to be learned from each other in terms of how to negotiate a particular clause. I mean, there are success stories in countries, the same countries, that can be replicated in others. But for that to happen, and it won't happen through the use of consultants or service providers, because service providers can only do so much. They can do plain vanilla, they can do copy paste, but as to replicate something that worked for a particular jurisdiction, that is difficult. So I don't have an exact answer to your question, sure. But I think it's high time. It's high time to see that. To take the bull by the horn and address this issue through coordination.
Boholo left for a minute. I think she's on her way back. So I'll go with Dauda.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I think the first question that needs to be asked is, why would you need a borrowers club first? For what purpose? If you want to know why actually we're not seeing it. My understanding, of course, when I hear about the opening remarks by Hannah, was that I think the Borrowers Club was aimed at helping borrowers clubbing together in sort of taking out loans, like that I can see maybe an opportunity or the merit of having that when you have, let's say a regional project, for instance, actually a number of countries having a regional project and trying to see how best to fund it, by clubbing together and sort of trying to get a common loan that they would service together. That can certainly make sense. But now when you were talking about actually having a borrowers club for other purposes, whether it is to make sure that you increase your bargaining power, or whether it is to reduce the the rates at which you are borrowing actually, or you are getting there, I think that's actually a way to different fundamentals. And I believe that's where we have most, there would be most impact in having actually some borrowers coordination. How you can make sure, if you take the case of African countries, how you can make sure that they can speak in one voice in front of creditors, to make sure that at least they can get a fair deal of let's say the way they are taken aboard the international financial system, the way they can actually remove that Africa risk premium that was talked about. I think that's where Africa needs to really get together. Now the problem is, once you realize why you would need some coordination, you need to ask how to do it. I think we all, in the case that was given of the Grameen Bank, actually, paradoxically, it was the creditor itself that actually put the borrowers together.
Fair enough.
That wouldn't actually work in the country's situation, right? Because you wouldn't expect I'm just giving you one example. A Creditors club, like the Paris club, actually organizing the borrowers together to make sure that they can, bring more sort of speaking in one voice. So it has to come from the borrowers. And when you were talking about those type of coordination, you're always talking as economists, we always talk about coordination failures, how you really faces a lot of challenges when you have to put people together, when you have to put countries together to actually for a common purpose. We've seen it. Paulo have seen it at the World Bank when he was ED. I have seen it at the IMF when I was also ED. I think it's extremely critical. My sense is the best way to do it is to empower regional institutions. Let's say, for instance, in the case of Africa, ideally, we would have liked to see African Union Commission actually strong enough to take on board those type of initiatives to make sure that at least it convene countries so that they can discuss about how best to coordinate themselves in front of creditors. Unfortunately, we're a little bit far away from that situation, but that would be the ideal situation actually if you want to go ahead in the case of Africa where we are focusing on. And I think if you're able to do that, I believe that would be certainly very beneficial. Unfortunately, we are a little bit far away from that.
Thank you. I will go back to Bahula and then come to Maya. Minister.
Thanks, Jude.
The question was
usually,
why we don't see it.
Okay, yes, no, I got that. I'm saying
Okay.
Usually whenever I'm supposed to start engaging on something around just energy transition, I lose power. And I think it's because I think it's just because the continent feels it's important for us to speak to a just managed and financed transition altogether. So I don't know what's going on. So in just reflecting on your question and some of the bits that I picked up, I think I want to go back to the point that a lot of African countries finance that development through debt to get started. And as I believe it was Olivier who mentioned that most countries run for debt as a rescue mission already under duress. So that in itself, that position in itself makes it very difficult to coordinate beforehand. But I think that there's a very good opportunity to start preparing and work on a vision of how we're going to finance development in the continent going forward, and not just thinking about fighting fires and creating a little bit of wiggle room within our fiscal space. And not to seem like the only thing I believe in is the AFCFTA, but I just feel like we put so much work into that. And the second tier, the second phase around the protocol on investment, I see it as another opportunity for us to rally and consolidate around how we're dealing with investors and dealing with issues in particular around de-risking investment in the continent, because financing is not only about MDBs and the larger DFIs and so forth. It's also about how we are catalyzing private sector to finance development. And one of the key issues we know is that there's a lot of hesitancy and perceived risk, particularly around some of the issues on currency, some of the issues on regulatory and governance issues, lack of bankable project pipelines, counterparty risks, and lack of technical capacity. And I just feel like some of that could be captured within the space of the protocol on investment, of exactly how it is that we intend as a continent to protect investor rights, but how we intend to show credibility and reduce, or even at a point eliminate, this perceived risk, because we know that the continent is not even nearly as risky as it has been perceived to be. So some of the one challenge that I identified is the one associated with what Olivier said, and then the traditional belief of, we must compete for financing for development. And I think that we could get more If we do think around as well some transboundary projects, investments going into transboundary projects, into regional projects, and then we start to consolidate around those. And the benefits that accrue around regional projects will start to see those benefits accruing around national projects. So I'm sidestepping the issue of why are we not seeing it, but really moving towards, I think that we can see a lot more of that if we start really rallying and working towards the implementation and focusing on investment protocol, amongst others. There is, Judah, given that now I'm now in this climate action and green space, I find it very important that we start to think about how we're positioning the continent broadly within this green finance infrastructure, because we run another risk of finding asymmetry within the green financial infrastructure. As it stands, the continent only gets around 14% of climate finance, and other major regions get close to 60–80% and so forth. And we need to just consolidate, aggregate our projects beforehand, before this green financial infrastructure completely gets out of hand. Back over to you, Judy.
I have to say, I'm really impressed how, you know, all of your answers, you bring them back to the AFCFTA. I mean, that's amazing. But
Judy, I was part of negotiated, so my mind is still
fair enough.
broadly linked.
But Maya, back to this point about why some of the impediments to see borrowers coordinate and their actions, especially, I mean, I can understand that they're going into a loan agreement, you're going by yourself. What stops you from calling the finance minister in another country and getting tips from them? Look, why do we not see this more often?
Well, thank you very much. Of course, there's always this issue of, well, in a restructuring, if you mean in a restructuring, there could be this issue of stigma around that. But you have to get rid of that concept. And actually, when going, why in this reform of the international financial architecture that we need to do and give more responsibility to the creditor, right? In this question about risk premium and African risk premium, what's the responsibility of the creditor, right? Because the creditor knows beforehand the premium, and then they have enough power to secure whatever it takes, repayment at the full percent, and they have this. Goes back again to the issue of power asymmetries that we need to fight. And I think either is a joint loan that we could ask regionally, globally, or I don't know, by income country, either is that proposal or reform proposal or restructuring proposal. I mean, the question always goes to the reform of the international architecture and the powers asymmetries that exist between creditors and debtors. Where is the transparency from the creditors, and where is the responsibility, right? Because too much is asked on the side of the debtor, but we should start asking more for responsibility and actions from the creditor side. This is as in Argentina, it takes two to tango, right? But let me also go briefly back to one of the experiences in Latin America about the Creditor Club. We have the Cartagena Club. It's not really widespread known, the experience on what happened in Latin America in the 80s. Maybe there are some lessons to take from that experience, like in the 80s with Latin American countries. There were 11 countries who participated in the Cartagena group. The Cartagena group started with a meeting in 1984 in Colombia, where foreign and finance ministers of these 11 Latin American countries got together to discuss debt issues, different debt issues, but especially their problems with the debt situation that was mounting in the continent. They were frustrated in the lack of bargaining power, but also how to respond with especially and mainly the US position in handling and resolving the debt difficulties. But what's striking me the most is that according to when did more research about this issue, ECLAC, CEPAL, found out that also the response from the creditor was better than expected, and the creditors responded better because they find out that when these countries issued some statements and position papers, they were less radical than they thought they were going to be in their demands, and they find it very reasonable, the creditors. So this is very, I thought that was interesting, but also what is interesting, and I think it's one of the main lessons from this group that I think it's then for different reasons, the group diluted themselves, like it disappeared, but it was for different reasons. It happened for different reasons, but what mainly it was because lack of leadership, lack of strong leadership. So we need strong leadership, also a convening partner maybe to get together. When this is another question, who should be the convening partner? Or the institution, the convening institution who can get borrowers together. But also because then, because countries when it started to grow or the perspective were starting to get different in terms of their outlook, they started to get different deals, and then everything went from themselves. So this makes sense, but well, this was one of the difficulties for the group to continue. But I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from borrowers and from recent experiences, and that there are a lot of merits for, I don't know if it's a club, a caucus, a meet, like some borrowers to get together, but not only regional, but I think there should be positive for different regions also to get together and learn from different experiences. One additional take from Argentina, recent experience. Argentina did and provided to the creditors their own debt sustainability analysis. We have our own DSA. This was something that we fight a lot to have. And we fight with the IMF for these assumptions and for our own DSA. And this is not easy, but we have our own DSA put forward first. And we also got a different timeline to when we discuss it with creditors about our own debt restructuring. We first had a negotiation with private creditors and then the IMF. So this is something different because and it was a lot, but it was very much contested. But there are a lot of lessons learned from our experience that we can share with other countries, that not because of avoiding the stigma. We don't want to say, well, we want to share our experience because you are going to have to get your debt restructured, but you need to know what we did in order to prepare yourself for having a better deal eventually, because you have to lower your risk premium, or how to fight, or how to manage your debt in a sustainable way. Actually, that was our main premise, to have a deal that allowed the country to grow and to be sustainable, to be affordable. So we have our own principles as well. So of course, I'm happy to share more about our experience, but these are a lot different things that we can discuss together globally as well, the whole global South, as it says.
And this is excellent. I think most restructuring and debt negotiations begin with the IMF's debt sustainability analysis, and for a country to present its own and sort of, push back against the IMF a bit. I don't know how many countries feel that space is open for them to be able to do that. I think there are 3 of us here who've been in cabinet, and I negotiated alone with the Chinese. I didn't call anyone in Guinea or in Sierra Leone to ask, what their experience was, if they could give me tips. And I think we need to sort of socialize the idea that it's okay for us to talk to each other. And it's not just with China, but with any creditor. At least the idea that we can share notes and share tips. Obviously, maybe the creditor wouldn't like that, but we're not doing this for the creditor, we're doing it for ourselves. So this idea, one of the reasons why we're, at least here at CGD, we're attracted to this topic about a borrowers club and the need for borrowers to be able to coordinate among themselves is to socialize this idea so that it becomes something as part of this international framework for this. But it's time now to go to you. I've been asking the questions for a minute, and I'm sure there are people in the audience here, but people online who have questions for general questions for the panelists, but for individual speakers too. So we'll open up now for questions. Yes, sir. Just tell us who you are and then go into your question.
Thank you very much for very interesting discussion. My name is Xavier Mwamba. I work with the Open Society Foundation. There'll be several colleagues here.
Okay.
See how much you're interested in the issue of debt from different perspectives.
Hmm.
I think my question is, so beyond the focus on thematic in terms of the coordination for what, like what is the purpose of coordination? So just beyond the feeding of solidarity and all the other technical benefits that may come. Because coordination, as you know, from many different angles, takes a lot of effort, and there are many examples of, fraudsters. Do you think it should be anchored by some other broader philosophical underpinnings, whether they're political or economic? So, for example, it needs commitment. It needs not just political leadership buy-in, but also country buy-in. So some sort of glue that gives the right kind of incentives to keep countries interested, such that even when countries move across different parts of development, they don't feel they're big boys now, big countries. They don't need that collective space and they break off alone. The example Maya gave. What is your experience from other coordination platforms in terms of what it takes actually to sustain the coordination and create the right incentives? Because there's a cost to coordination as well. And countries have to wear this cost of coordinating with others versus the other benefits of doing their own things domestically.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we need Pan-Africanism to return? What is the philosophical underpinning for borrowers to coordinate that doesn't change because the country's economic position changes? I think that's a good question. Any other questions? Sir, we have to get a question from this side before we go to the panel. So no, please.
Hello. My name is Atharv. I'm a senior at Georgetown studying international development. My question is, taking a step back a little bit, do you think debt to GDP is still a good metric to measure debt distress? And if not, what do you think are viable alternatives that might provide a more fair picture?
We should take at least one more question and then we can put it to you, and then just feel free to answer any of the questions. Yes, ma'am.
I forgot, I need to say who I am. My name is Nicole Kiers, and I am the head of sovereign finance at the African Legal Support Facility, therefore work for Olivier. My question actually relates to, and I don't know if people on the panel have a specific answer to it, but when you were talking about the structure in the beginning, Hannah, on how it would be pooled and how repayment would be pooled, how do you ensure that each government pays their respective piece of the pie to the whatever it is, the main account that then gets refunded to or repaid to the creditors? How do you do that? And do you think that that could be a major stumbling block for countries to participate in this? The idea that maybe they're paying their piece, but other countries aren't doing that as well. So how do we reconcile that?
I think that's a fair question, especially if there are two successive coup d'etats, how can we ensure that each country will remain committed and continue to pay its commitment? I shared an example today before I go to the panel about how we in Liberia got the World Bank use IDA credit to buy political risk guarantee on a project, and it was the first time it had ever been done. But to get the World Bank to take that risk, the government of Liberia, committed that if we departed from it, all of the bank's projects in Liberia would be at risk. So that was what made us keep our commitment. Obviously, I don't know how you do that on a regional level. So we'll turn to the audience. There are three questions. That, how do we hold governments accountable to keep up their end of the bargain if we were to create a pool? Second is GDP still a good metric? If it's not, do you have a suggestion? And third is, do we have to bring back Kwame Nkrumah? No, that's not what he said. What is the glue, the philosophical glue that underpins borrowers so that even if the economic situation changes, they still are committed to, so we should start with Paulo because he was the last one on the last round. So Paulo, any of the questions?
Well, I think when you say whether we have to bring back Kwame Nkrumah, I would say yes.
Okay.
Before the facts come the dream. And I think when Africa got together to push for independence, there was a glue. Once you lose that glue, some of the technocrats don't like this thing. They say, oh, it's too political. I'm a technician, I'm a lawyer, I'm an economist. I don't have time for those things. And this is what's creating now a situation where in Africa, basically everybody's complaining about how countries are run. Because the technocrat, us, we have decided for many years that we don't have time to deal with some of the politics, and we'll pay a very high price. It's just the beginning of it. But to go back to what you were saying, there is no other alternative than regional integration for Africa. The CFTA, I'm a big fan of it. And a mistake has been made in the 19th century about the way our continent is divided. You look at my own country, size of Belgium, 1.7 million people. How do you make that country viable today? Right? One can say, well, but you have Singapore, but it's different. So I strongly believe that we have to go back to the basic of regional integration. And it could be accelerated through projects. You have regional entities. It could be accelerated through projects. I look at the experience of ASCAI we discussed yesterday. I was involved myself in the design with the old man John Doe, we call group of us. Today is the only airline apart from Ethiopian Airline, which is profitable. And it has been structured in a way where you have multilateral institutions, you have countries, and it's working. Why? Because you make sure that you have an operator like Ethiopian Airline to play a role as a shareholder with 30% of ASCAI. Go back to the experience of Africa Finance Corporation, where I was also involved in setting it up. Initially, people were skeptical in Nigeria. Today, it has 30-something countries, more than 50 billion balance sheet, and it's moving. So I'm saying that if we don't go back to the basic in trying to assemble our countries around particular projects, particular initiatives, I don't think we're going to make it. That's why I agree with Dauda about the African Union has a role on this. Now, you can criticize the African Union, but it has changed also. When Kagame was engaged to structure it, you have a different African Union, let's be frank. It's not the same that you had initially. And we lose the opportunity to be a bloc and push for it. Even in IMF and the World Bank. When I was AD, one of the things we pushed was for an additional chair for Africa, to have more voice. And for more than 2 years, I was across Africa to push for it with another colleague, who's Kasakende from Uganda. And we were very proud and very excited. What was the final decision was to give Nigeria and South Africa a chair. That chair could have been an African Union one. And then you galvanize people around the voice. Because let's be frank, the Bretton Woods institution still have a convening power and a very big influence in our countries. And before some of the meetings of the Bretton Woods, ministers of finance of Africa were getting together to have a position. So you go back to the issue of leadership. Sometimes you're lucky, you have a constellation of ministers of finance, very determined, and then you see the result. Then suddenly you have a gap and a lack of leadership, and then you see the results. when you had Tabaruka and a couple other ministers of finance, think what happening. They were talking to each other. So will you leave this thing for luck? I think yes. When you are lucky during a decade, you have good ministers of finance, they get together, you have results. So I think my final word of what you're trying to do, Anna, I think is to push for it. I think there is a role for clubbing. It has to be thematic. We cannot get everything right. You cannot have all African countries right in one point. Some will be negligent, some will be lazy, some very committed. Let's move those. I mean, who has said that Africa has to move in the same speed? No, it has never happened in other continents. So I don't see how it's going to happen. So I think it's something that should be pushed. Select a set of maybe sectors where we want that to happen. And then also, I mean, Olivier didn't mention that the facility has been set up to support African countries for the legal thing. And I think it's very useful. We have to push. But some African countries have to realize also that when you want good quality advice, you have to pay for it. This thing that systematically, when you need things, you go to the World Bank and then you wait for 10 months to have support through the grant, because the World Bank guys also struggle to have trust funds. You know, by the way, you know the size of the trust fund in the World Bank is huge. But you have to go and apply. It can take you 2 months, 3 months while you do other things. So some African country, because the advice is important, need to pay for it. I will stop there, but I'll give you an example on Guinea, for example. Guinea at some point was discussing with the Chinese about developing bauxite. And the Chinese wanted some blocks of the bauxite in exchange to a set of projects. And we talked to the Guinean at that time, look, you simply cannot do that. And they say, oh, how can I do? I need the loan from the side. I say, well, do you know what you're giving them in exchange to the project? So I think Olivier wasn't in the ILSF at that time, but they had to go, and I will not name the name of the company that they decided to use. They pay for it, and then they come back with some advice that prevented actually the government to take 2 or 3 blocks of bauxite and give it to Chinese in exchange to a 100-kilometer of road. So it gives you again an example that you cannot get this thing for free, or you just assume that you will wait for the World Bank to give you the grant to do that. At some point, our countries have the means to pay for good advice and make sure that you don't make some mistakes when it comes to you.
Outstanding. Thank you. So Paulo thinks the best way to do that is around regional integration at different levels. We still have the 2 questions. Is GDP a good metric? And Nicole's question about if we were to create a pool, if we were to do a regional project, how do you hold countries accountable for their share of that? So anyone wants to take a stab at it?
Okay, maybe quickly on those 2 questions. The first one, I think GDP is not usually used as a measure of debt distress, but it is part of the ratio that the IMF, for instance, use. For instance, you can have actually a ratio of debt to GDP to measure actually how high the borrowing is, or actually a ratio of debt service to GDP or revenue to GDP. I think that's how it is used. I think the way it the rationale behind is to say that the more the higher GDP is, or the larger GDP is, the easier it is for the country to service its debt, because actually it may get more revenue. So that's for one. The second question about actually how to make sure that at least when there is a number of countries clubbing together to get loan, that there is some adequate repayment. I think it's maybe more legal issues in some sense. I think, for instance, if I take the case of my own country, is Mauritania right now, for instance, they got together to exploit gas that is at the border, and they were able to really have a very strong framework that allowed them to exploit it. So it was like having a very good legal framework that allows you to define the responsibility of each country in terms of actually how you get, not only when there is a revenue stream, but also how much, what are your obligations in terms of financial obligation and all this. I think it's more about how you can really have a very strong legal framework. That being said, I think I just wanted to make also a broad point. I think it's extremely critical to really promote the idea of having borrower coordination. I think this is something that is, we have said over and over. There is a lot of benefit that is associated with that. I certainly don't need to come back to that. But we also have to be careful of thinking of it as the panacea. The reality is, I think when the countries make debt decisions or borrowing decisions, I think what matters more is what is the quality of the project that you're trying to actually get the loan from. What matters more is how strong what Paulo was saying earlier about the debt management unit being able to really manage properly the debt. I think those are the key issues that matters. The question is what type of project you're trying to actually finance. If you have like they say in French, un éléphant blanc, I'm not so sure actually that no matter how coordinated you are with your borrowers, whether it's going to really make any big difference. So I think those issues have to be also kept in mind when we talked about debt management in Africa. And now, of course, on top of that, once those are solved, I think the idea is to make sure that at least we take advantage of the experience of all the borrowers to really improve. And it's not just in Africa. I think the same way creditors clubs actually include countries from different regions, I think also the same way borrowers would gain in actually getting to know what has happened in Argentina, what has happened in Asia. And of course, you may have the regional or Pan-African institutions actually being the convening power, but at the same time, I think it would be, to me, a missed opportunity not to really take that advantage to also coordinate with other borrowers from other regions to learn from their experience and actually what has worked in their countries and what hasn't. I'm pretty sure a country like Argentina has a lot. I think if there was some degree to be given, I think I would say that actually Argentina has a PhD in depth. and certainly many African countries would have to learn from them. So the idea is just, yes, let's try to coordinate borrowers in Africa, but let's really learn also from the experience of others region, and not just Latin America or Asia, but even Europe and North America. I think there is an experience there that we can also learn from.
Outstanding. Maya, before I come to you, I want to go to the two panelists who are online. Kevin, did you have a comment? Well, I see your hand up, so yeah, please, by all means.
Me?
Yeah, no, not Kevin, that's Olivier. My bad.
No. I assumed that was Kevin. That I like that name. The glue, and coming back to the question about what should be the glue, and I'm not so sure if the glue has to be of a philosophical or sort of ideological nature. I think simple pragmatism should suffice to lead countries to talk to each other, and that is tied to a question I saw in the Q&A box, talking about transparency, and asking whether countries would just be willing to open their books and work on an open book mode with others to improve their lending terms. I think from that perspective, I'm also trying to figure out what would be so specific or so secret that a country wouldn't want to. I mean, your GDP is known, the growth of your GDP is known, your DS, your debt sustainability analysis can be figured out somehow. So I'm not so sure that transparency would and should be an issue for countries to cooperate. But just one last thing I want to insist on, and I thank Paulo for advocating for ALSF to be paid for its services. I couldn't have said it better. But one thing I really want to insist on is capacity building at all levels: debt management units, lawyers in countries, in all the personnel in the Ministry of Finance or around the sectoral ministers that take part. I mean, the PPP unit, for instance, where sovereign guarantees are involved. Capacity building for me is really key. That's the groundwork, and I've witnessed in the past, situations where, as an African, sitting across the table, I witnessed that. I witnessed, you know, the lack of bargaining power. And it's not that people don't want to, it's just that the exposure hasn't been that great. So capacity building is key. And then, as Paulo was saying, good advisory on specific transactions, but that can only be built upon, you know, a good foundation, and that very good foundation is capacity building. And we provide capacity building, you know, irrespective of nationality. So again, a lesson learned in Botswana for us is a good lesson to share with Guinea or with DRC. You know, of course, depending on the specific circumstances, but again, sharing is key, and nothing should prevent us from doing that.
Hear from Maya now, and then I don't see Baholo online. So is she? Okay. So from Maya, and then we'll go back to questions. It looks like we have questions from online. So we'll hear Aloysius, and then we'll go to the online questions. But Maya, please.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief to answer some of this question. And I think this debate is really, really interesting. And there are a lot of ideas to pursue, and I will keep discussing these topics forever. But I think to the question on the GDP about being a good metric, actually what in our experience, but what we learn is that the country, for what it needs its debt to be sustainable, is to have repayment capacity and to grow. And to have repayment capacity, the country needs to grow and to have their own, not their own resources, I mean in a sense that sustainable flow of resources. Like let me go back again to our experience. I apologize, I don't have a flow chart, but if you see we took office and we see this payment schedule, and you see that you have foreign currency payments up from, like, for the Argentina debt was, let me put it this way, unaffordable and unsustainable. So this goes to the question about capacity building also, and why we need to get together. You have to have a full picture of the debt cycle. And maybe we need to get together as borrowers, or to increase our experience, like to share our experiences. But I believe it's in a full debt cycle is when you, for instance, for us to confront the challenges that the humanity now faces, as climate change, as others, and we need to have resilient infrastructure. We need to have transformative industries. We need to have different way of producing things. We need to change the way we export things. Or I don't know, a lot of transformation should happen in our countries, and to finance the product, this transformation, we need long-term finance and in foreign currency. So you need to learn all the cycles. When we start to embark on that process, you encounter that suddenly you have to, I don't know, it's like the whole management and the whole cycle of the debt. When you ask for debt, then you have to repay it, your growth projections. Of course, you don't anticipate the pandemic, and when you anticipate, then when a pandemic unfolds and you have to restructure your debt, then you have to know how to do it, who to consult to, what advisor you need to hire, to what for you need a communication agent, an information agent, communication agent. I don't know. There are a lot of things that you need to do in the dev cycle that maybe are not that well known, but these are also very important and goes to the topics that we are discussing today. So yes, I think. Well,
thank you. I just before we go to the questions, Olivier and I guess Nicole's here in the room. One of the things that I've said, I use ALSF. We were negotiating with a South African firm that wanted to build a bridge and use tolls. But in my understanding, maybe it's changed. It was demand driven. We needed to come to you, right? I never heard the country manager of the African Development Bank show up and say, hey, this is a service that we have, we know you're negotiating all of this stuff. Has that changed? The reason I knew about the ALSF is because I was in a technical position before I got appointed to a political one. And so in the technical position, I knew that. And if I didn't have that experience as a technician in the government and becoming, well, I wasn't a politician. Well, I don't know. Before getting appointed to a political role, I probably wouldn't have had that. How are you telling sovereigns? How are you telling governments that this is a service that is available to them? Because I feel like if it remains demand driven, I don't know how much the uptake is going to be. So I'll just give you an opportunity to respond to that, and then we'll take the questions.
Thanks, Judy. Well, I'm here, and Nicole is in the room, and Tony is in the room. So we're not hiding. We are demand driven. That's the way. I mean, that's the construct of the ALSF. So of course, from a traditionally commercial standpoint, that is a constraint. However, in terms of the interaction, and we've worked across over 45 African countries. So I think the LSF has gained, over the past 12 years or so, has gained visibility, and we're working towards increasing that visibility. But and we work across sectors: infrastructure, energy, sovereign finance, of course, litigation. The relationship we've established with countries, I mean, such as Liberia and others, allows us to identify, and for instance, if we go if we're working on a PPP project, will have some sovereign finance ramification. So we use the opportunity to raise the issue of whether ALSF support could be requested or could be required in that particular space, or with respect to that particular project. So as much as we're demand driven, we try as much as possible to to draw attention to our services, across the board and across the sectors we work on. But you're right, we're working towards increasing the visibility of the LSF. But that's a journey, but it's a journey that is well underway, I would say.
Thank you, sir. Aloysius, and then we'll give Hannah an opportunity to read out some of the questions that are coming from online, please, sir. Yes, him. Yes.
Thank you very much. I just caught, my apologies, I came a bit late. I caught the tail end of Brother Gomez's Paulo's comments, and I just wanted to build on that because it's very easy to—
Can you tell us who you are?
Aloysius Odu, Director of the Africa Growth Initiative at Brookings.
Former Vice President at the African Development Bank, yeah?
Staff member.
Okay.
It's very easy to leave the couple of days we're here in the nation's capital and think that, oh, poor Africa, right? I mean, the point you made yesterday as well. I think sometimes we need to also help and change the narrative. Paulo mentioned 2007, 2009. We've been there before. Food, fuel, financial crisis. We thought it was the worst until now. And now we're still not out of the woods on the pandemic. Africa didn't cause the pandemic. Food, fuel, fertilizer rising. Africa didn't invade Ukraine. And so at the end of the day, one of the ways we changed the narrative in 2009, if you remember, is that under the auspices of the African Development Bank, a committee of 10 was set up, central bank governors and finance ministers. Whether it was G20 or G8, whatever meeting was happening, the central bank governors and the finance minister of Africa had a pre-meeting meeting before going. And so that enables us to go to some of these functions with the we feeling that we have a point of view, we're here to protect and defend. You take these SDR allocations now, if the African finance ministers and central bank governors had already, obviously, charity begins at home. Suppose they say, for example, the allocations coming from others should be deposited at the African Development Bank instead of these little quotas for each country. In terms of leveraging, it's like 4-to-1, right? Olivier can confirm, and others on the bank. And so this idea of speaking with one voice is very important. And then we have another opportunity. Our heads of states will be assembling here in December. The question is, do we have an ask for the Biden-Harris administration? That requires preparation before they come here to have a common view. Is it Agenda 2063? What is it? What would we be asking? So this sort of, we don't always have to feel that we copy from elsewhere. We did have the Committee of 10. I'm not sure what happened to it, but it, finance ministers and central bank government used to meet religiously before every international event. I just wanted to substantiate what.
Thank you. So there's history of coordination there, and so we don't have to recreate the wheel. We can start from there. Hannah, could you read some of the questions from online and then give the panelists an opportunity to respond?
Oh, I think I'm actually mic'd. Anyway,
Oh, there you go.
So
Yes.
that makes it much easier. Okay, we have quite a few questions from online, so I'm going to read a few of them. Number one, how would, and I think the audience is asking for more specificity on this, I guess, how to manage creditor backlash, who would support a borrowers club, for example. Is there a view that China might support a borrowers club because others are the largest creditors? So that's one question. In the context of restructuring, is there an opportunity for African sovereigns to standardize terms for haircuts, repayment periods, and so on? So has there been any experience of that, or is there an idea for that? And then another question, what should transparency look like in a borrower's club? Should countries completely open all their books, share all terms and conditions and loan contracts with other borrowers, or try another route, such as just sharing experiences? Would the level of transparency between the borrowers affect the effectiveness of such a club?
All right, or can we just go with those?
We can go with those.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it seems like
we still have more. But, yeah.
So again, we'll open the floor to the panelists. You heard the questions. Just respond to whichever one of the questions you want to respond to. Let's start online with Olivier, if there are any of those questions that you want to respond to.
None in particular. I think I preempted the question on transparency, and again, just to reiterate that I don't think we should be concerned about transparency. The terms offered to basically, and if we go back to if we go back to the basics of learning how to negotiate a good loan documentation, part of it is common sense, and the specifics have to do with your jurisdiction, the specifics of your jurisdictions. But a good part of it is common sense and matching your interests with what you're presented with from a lender. And from that perspective, I think that borrowers would be well inspired to share as much common sense as possible. So that at least there's a good part in common in terms of basic loan documentation, and also mechanisms that help alleviate part of the risk or part of the pressure that comes with lending. So yes, so that's just to address the question regarding transparency. I don't think it should be a major constraint.
Thank you. China is not a member of the Paris Club; it's an observer. China is now, at least in Africa, the largest bilateral creditor. And what do you think the response of creditors will be? Do you think China will support a borrowers club? You know, do you think the Paris Club would be like, no, we don't know about this, we don't like it? What do you think the response would be?
I believe actually borrowers act themselves actually should support the borrowers club. When you look at the debt negotiations or discussion between creditors and borrowers, most of the time, especially when it is actually in a debt restructuring talks, you're thinking more about actually a zero-sum game, where my gain would be actually the loss of the other party, most of the time. So why would you expect, if you're actually having that type of debate with someone, that person would be actually, or that party would be sort of empowering you to be able to actually get more from that party? So the idea is, to me, I think, it's borrowers themselves that should support the club and to make sure that actually it becomes a reality. And there also, I think actually, I also would add that what we are doing today is extremely critical. What CGD and Development Reimagine have done is this type of activity, action by non-government stakeholders that can also push government themselves to be aware of the need to really sort of get together and to try to actually, have better debt coordination, borrowers coordination. And I believe what I'm saying here is, I think sometimes the stakeholders that are involved, the state may not actually be the first movers, but actually it takes, I guess, other stakeholders, whether it is, I guess, in the non-governmental sphere, the non-philanthropic sphere, or the civil societies in the countries that actually can push for that to happen. So I think this is the type of conversation that we need to put on the forefront and to make sure that it pushes. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't expect China to be the one pushing for borrowers coordination in Africa or in Latin America or elsewhere. It should be actually those borrowers themselves that shouldn't do it. And I think it's fair game if the Paris Club doesn't do it, because they're not there to defend the interests of the borrower. They're there to defend the interests of their own members of the club. And I think it certainly makes sense that they would not be taking the lead in that.
Yeah, I think like everything in life, you trust, but you verify. Chinese could be a good friend, but I will not wait for Chinese to back me up. I think I will not wait for anyone. This is a very wild world. You have to recognize that. A young friend was talking about the GDP. Of course, the GDP is not fair the way it is. We know now, with the impact of climate change, that there are other things that are more important than the numbers you're adding to establish the value. It's not about price now, it's about value. I was talking to you earlier that I went to see the people from Conservation International. We have 8,700 protected areas and parks in Africa. If you put them all together, it's the size of Australia, plus almost twice Australia. You don't want me to put value on this? You're going to use all of the GDP? So I think there's a whole narrative and new discussion we have to start. And think once we get into that, that will probably give the right value to the thing. Because if Africa starts mixing up this protected area, I mean, take just the Central Africa. Many people don't know that if the Congolese, the Central African, and the Gabonese start mixing up and destroying their protected area, you won't have enough water to pump to the Nile. And when you don't have water pumping into the Nile, you have a revolution in Egypt, because Egypt will be dry. So those aspects will build on what you're saying in terms of the GDP. And I will stop there. I think, again, we need to go to the club. The club has to be led by Africans. You shouldn't wait for anyone to back it up. And I think to focus on what we can do together. There are roads we can do together. There are airports we can do together. There's no space for each country. And I will point the finger on the airlines. My brother from Senegal, they created Senegal Airline. I'm sorry, it's going to be a problem. The Ivorians have created Air d'Ivoire. It's going to be a problem. It would be nice to have a flag and move around, But to manage an airline takes a lot of experience. The Ethiopian has done it for 70 years. So unless we get together, it's not going to happen. So clubbing together is not just on debt, it's on many things, because that's the reality of how our continent has been atomized for the century.
If I can just follow quickly on that, what Paulo said, and is extremely critical. And also at the same time, we also have to look at also the alternative. You talked about the airline companies. Africa also tried Air Africa in the past, where they all got together, unfortunately, yeah, and it was a failure. Why? I think what I'm saying is also it's important also to prepare the ground to make sure that when, yes, we get together, it is successful. That's the way to go, but it requires actually some work to be done ahead of
and pay for it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really, really important.
Because you cannot go for a PPP project and then you take your bunch of nice people in the ministry. They haven't been exposed. You have to pay for it. That's why I was insisting with Olivier. And when countries say that they don't have money to pay for advisory service for a PPP, it's not true. Even the smallest country like Guinea-Bissau can pay for it if the project is good. It's an investment. When you're taking your advisors to help you, how do you go to negotiate? You don't have a lawyer, you don't have a financial advisor. What kind of management of a country you're thinking about? You're going to just improvise, in a very stylish way to go to negotiate. It's ridiculous. I think those some of the frank discourse has to happen.
Yeah.
This kind of paternalistic and childish thing, no, we have to go and find a grant at World Bank. It's not true. Even the smallest country in Africa can pay for an advisory service for a good PPP project.
Yes, sir. We're not going to negotiate with prayers. So there's this question about support from creditors, but there was also a question about the extent of the transparency, like how transparent, and will transparency undermine the coordination? So any of those that you want to comment on?
Well, let me go back to one of my initial points on this. Actually, I believe that I agree now that transparency, there is no issue about debt or country sharing its debt figures, because and it's mainly all available and disclosed, because when you issue debt or when there are bilateral agreements that maybe sometimes they are discussed differently, but I don't see a problem about the debtor disclosing their debt figures, right? But I really want to go back to my point about the creditor transparency, the transparency on the creditor side. I'm meaning more, of course, in a restructuring, a negotiation, but I think it has to go all the way, right? We have to push for that, for transparency in all the cycle, on all bargaining on debt. But because with globalization, with financialization, there are new creditors, new instruments. There are a lot of things a lot of new things. Of course, the emergence of new creditors, but I think we are not putting enough. We are not seeing enough push back for private creditors to engage. You were discussing what the China's role will be. I understand that for Africa, it's the main bilateral creditor, but in some of these recent initiatives, as the Common Framework and the DSSI, especially in the Common Framework, that it was difficult for China to get engaged at some point in some of these creditor committees at the Common Framework that was created by the G20. But when you look at the figures, of course, China is one of the main bilateral creditors, but where is the private sector engaged in these initiatives on the debt? Where is the main companies? I don't want to name any of these companies, but I just wanted to go out to that point. I think that's also important. And well, I'm pro transparency, and I think it's a good thing to increase transparency. But
I think, there's always a cost for coordination. Someone has to underwrite the cost of coordination. Paulo thinks it will be the Bretton Woods institutions. Dauda thinks it should be regional organizations. Whoever does it, there has to be, someone just simply has to embed the cost of coordination. But I would like to just closing comments now from the panel. I think this conversation, the only thing missing from this conversation is probably we should have been having this conversation in Nairobi or Accra and not here in Washington. And one hopes that in the time to come, that these kinds of conversations will actually occur on the continent. And then we will see an Abidjan group that negotiates with the Paris Club. All right, well, we'll just take one more and then we'll have to. Okay. So please, her and then the minister wanted to say something too, so.
Thank you. Maybe Sowisi Jamfi from the African Center for Economic Transformation. As you're thinking about your wrap-up questions, I suppose I had a couple of things for you I'd like to get your views on. The first one is, we know that we have some regional public goods that we need to club together to develop. So how could we possibly use a borrowers club to realize that vision? And the second question is, it's, I've been at the annual meetings for a few meetings today, the last few days, and it's all about restructuring the IFS, and at the end of it is for Africa, okay? And I'm not quite sure what, more money for Africa for what, for me, is a fundamental question. Yes, we have an immediate crisis, but we seem to have perfected the art of everybody rushing at the immediate crisis and not thinking about the long-term solutions. And what I really like about this panel is you're thinking about the medium and long term. So as the world is thinking about restructuring the IFIs for a better outcome, because my question is, what are the things we should be looking at now for laying the foundations for us not to be back here again in 10 years' time, asking ourselves, how do we restructure debt? Because debt is not a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when you use it poorly. How do we not come back here again using instruments like the Borrowers Club?
Sure, just one minute. Let's do Ni and then we'll do the minister. He had his hand up and then but I was looking at the minister. You know, minister recognizes minister, yeah?
Good afternoon. My name is Nate Simmons. I used to work at the World Bank Group and AFDB. At the World Bank, I started the African Diaspora engagement program under the Training Competitiveness Global Practice. I hear a lot, I think a couple of people made a question or make some comments around sharing resources. African countries should be able to talk about best practices and talk about, like having a premium, or I think brother here was talking about should have a premium before the mean. Well, I'm Ghanaian American, both my parents are from Ghana. Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana have been talking together for a few years about cocoa, trying to find ways to harmonize the price of cocoa. Why do they do it? Because they felt their farmers were not getting a share price of cocoa. If you look, last time I checked, I just got back from London. Last time I was getting chocolate in Piccadilly Circus. I'm like, this is some good chocolate. And I'm like, this last time I checked, cocoa wasn't growing here in UK. Cocoa's from Wakanda, right? 60% of cocoa arrives from it comes from worldwide cocoa comes from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. Why did Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire come together, right? Now, how do we take those examples and use it for other parts of our economy? Brother here was talking about we put our land together. It's probably more than the parklands in Africa is probably more, national parks is probably more than Australia. Well, we have to find ways to get the best practices and say, okay, well, these two countries are talking. How do we take what's going on in cocoa and filter or use it for other parts of the economy? So there's examples there, and we need to figure out how do we use it exponentially, because this is not rocket science. This is nothing, so that was my comment.
Thank you. So we'll hear from Malado, and then we'll have to, I should say though, we started like 5 minutes late because you guys were late coming in. So we would just give the panelists an opportunity to just brief remarks. You don't have to answer all of the questions, and please engage the panelists after, and then we'll have to close. We want to finish on time, or as close to on time as possible. Minister.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. My name is Malado Kaba. So I see some colleagues from I've now joined the African Development Bank as a director for gender, women, and civil society, but I'm also a former Minister of Economy and Finance of my beautiful Guinea. And we were lucky to have also Paulo Gomez actually advising us during that time. It's been challenging, but very interesting time. I'm very pleased to see this conversation because I remember in 2018, when Hannah actually invited me to China to discuss already those issues of, during a context where there was a lot of negative narrative about China's so-called diplomacy, et cetera, we extensively talked about that. I think we've come a long way. I think this borrowers club is absolutely necessary for a couple of reasons. Number one, we need to change the narrative about this perception on the continent. No one will convince me that it is more risky to invest in Africa than sending men and women to the moon. Number two, I think it's also very important now for us to gain that bargaining power when it comes to negotiating terms of loans, etc. But also when it comes to actually do a due diligence about companies that are supposed to implement contracts, because we are talking about transparency on I would say, the modality of funding transactions, but you all know the double entry, some of the double accounting principles. You look at the way you fund a transaction, but also the nature of the transaction. And in this regard, and I think this builds on what you've just said about the what. And I remember also President Xi Jinping in 2018 saying that we need to stay away from vanity projects. I don't have any problem with that either, as long as it is used to fund projects that will help us grow our economy, mobilize more resource, domestic resource mobilization, and of course create jobs. That's what we want, and promoting local content. So I think that this Borrowers Club, let's continue, let's push, let's influence, let's talk to leaders on the continent, because it is absolutely necessary. And I also fully agree with Paulo. We technocrats need to get into politics, definitely, because there's no other choice to make things move on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll, for the panelists, try to do it in a minute and a half, wrap up, and then we will have Anna come up and give a thanks to so we'll start with, I think Olivier's gone. It's late in Cote d'Ivoire anyway, so let's start with Paulo.
Yeah, I think we have covered most of the things. I'd like to thank people. The agenda still, a lot of things has happened, but there's some signal of reversal in the way we used to do things, or some of the efforts. But such initiative to club countries is just a natural thing that needs to happen in the context of those who believe that regional integration is the solution. And we need to prioritize what we want to use the club for, because we cannot cover all things together. If you ask me, infrastructure is important, but then it creates condition for companies to establish and to create job, because job is now a national security issue in Africa. So I will stop there.
Thank you. Thanks for this well-organized and timely conversation. Well, I think my main take again is that we still need to push for reform of the international financial architecture. We need to reform and keep pushing for the reform of the international financial institutions. This is key. We can only achieve that by getting together. Cross-regionally, I will say that we need to get together and push for further reforms. If not, nothing will change. So we need to reduce these power asymmetries. So we need to increase our bargaining powers. Need leadership and action and decision. I think I really like what you say, that before the facts come to dream. So if like have to take action. So
it was Churchill, by the way.
well, but you caught him. I didn't want to report. No. Well, I quote you because I think that's something to get us to action, and everything that could inspire us today to move forward and share from lessons and share from our learn from our experiences and be able to share them. I think that's a very important thing to do, and we can start with that as well.
The good thing with speaking last is you don't have much to say because everyone has already said it. So I won't be very long. I actually would repeat two things. First of all, I think it is important to talk about borrowers clubs because it certainly helps in many ways. I think Mavis talked about the fact that it could be used to promote regional public goods. Certainly, I think the question is how you do it, and that should be a technical matter. But I would go beyond the borrowers club. I think I would talk more about borrowers coordination in general. Having a borrowers club can be a mean to achieve more borrowers coordination. But I think the broader picture is how you can have borrowers coordination to achieve what Maya has said, for instance, about making sure that at least borrowers have a bigger voice in the in the reform of the international financial architecture. I think that requires more coordination so that they can speak in one voice and actually have more common position on that. And I think that should start as soon as possible. And we look forward to that.
Magnifique, thank you. Anna is going to close us. I think there's a reception. Well, all right. I was just like, Anna, please.
That's for me to say, no?
Yes.
Well, let me just say thank you very much to everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much, Jude, for moderating this important discussion. But I also think my hope today was that we would have a refreshing discussion, a discussion which is different to what we've been hearing elsewhere. And I think we really have achieved that today. And I really want to thank our panelists for doing that, but also to everybody in the audience here in this room and also online for all of your contributions. We didn't have enough time to get to all of the questions. There were lots and lots of comments and reflections, but this is just a start. And I think we've made very clear we've got experience to begin more coordination. We can use different tools. There's a full spectrum of coordination that we can work on. And I'm really excited about what this conversation and this discussion has generated. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone once again for joining us. For those of you who are here in DC, there is a reception afterwards, so please do stay and have more conversations, and we will remain in touch. We'll keep working on this. Thank you very much to the CGD team for your support in pulling this together, and also the Development Reimagined team as well. You've all been stellar, and thank you to all of those who support all of our work. This is what you're helping us to drive change. Thank you very much.